My name is Courtney, and as I celebrated my 35th birthday on a summer day filled with the enchanting melody of birdsong, I found myself summoned to the president's office, or rather, my boss, who happened to be my mother, Brenda. The Chicago heat seemed to have left her visibly bothered as she spoke curtly, turning her beautiful profile toward me. I have decided to hand the company over to your sister, Brittany. You are dismissed as of today, she declared. The brilliance of the summer sunshine made it difficult for me to fully comprehend the reality of her words. Apparently, a decade of engineering their entire global logistics network was not enough to overcome the fact that I did not fit the brand aesthetic. Before we go any further, I have to ask. Have you ever been the one doing all the work, while someone else took all the credit, just because they looked the part? Drop a yes in the comments. I need to know I am not alone in this. Brenda sat there, her signature diamond earrings catching the midday sun, looking as though she were presiding over a high-stakes board meeting rather than the destruction of her eldest daughter's life. To her, this was a necessary rebranding, a superficial adjustment to keep the corporate image polished. To me, it was a total breach of a 10-year unwritten contract. For a decade, I had been the silent engine of this logistics empire, performing the work of an entire department for the price of a junior accountant. I did not argue with her decision. Why would I? You do not beg a sinking ship to let you stay on board as the anchor. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent in our secure server room, 60 floors above the sleeping, wind-whipped streets of Chicago. The air in that room always smelled of ozone, static electricity, and the bitter scent of over-roasted coffee. While my mother and Brittany were sipping vintage champagne at charity galas and posing for social media, I was the one navigating the digital chaos of global shipping lanes. I was the one who stayed awake for 72 hours straight during the supply chain crisis, rerouting 15 massive cargo ships to avoid a bottleneck that would have cost us $4 million in late fees and penalties. I saved the firm, while I lived on cold caffeine and sheer, unadulterated spite. Brittany sat next to our mother, idly checking her reflection in her phone screen and adjusting her hair. She had been with the company for exactly 2 years, and her primary contribution to the business was choosing the color of the embossed stationery and flirting with our regional directors. She was the face of the firm. I was the ghost in the machine. But the thing about ghosts is that when they finally leave, the house starts to feel very empty and very haunted, very fast. Brenda leaned back in her Italian leather chair, her voice sounding like expensive silk pulled over a sharp blade. She told me the company needed a leader who embodied the executive lifestyle, someone whose presence did not dim the company's brand when walking into a room. My role, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, had become redundant. Redundant. I almost laughed at the sheer absurdity of the word. I had built the very ground she was standing on, stone by painstaking stone, and now she was telling me the architect was ruining the view. I did not point out that Brittany could not even explain the difference between a bill of lading and a shipping manifest without a search engine. Instead, I stood up and felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not even realized I was carrying. My mother looked at me expectantly, waiting for the breakdown, the plea for mercy, or maybe even a scream of betrayal. I gave her none of that. Emotion is just bad data in a final audit, and I had already moved past it. I simply walked to my desk and began the methodical process of decommissioning my existence within those walls. I cleared my personal encrypted databases and signed out of the central server for the last time. Every proprietary shipping route I had optimized, and every complex algorithm I had written for them, was now locked behind a wall of code they did not even know existed. As I packed my single box of belongings, I turned back to look at them one last time. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of a completed project. Brenda's brow furrowed in confusion. My silence was unnerving her more than any shout could have. I let a broad, genuine smile spread across my face, the first real smile I had felt in years. It was the kind of smile that made them visibly uncomfortable, the kind that whispered that I was finally free of a liability they were just beginning to inherit. "Good luck with the brand," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving the 61st floor and my family's shadow behind me. I walked into the family penthouse for the last time to gather the few things I actually owned. This was the space I had been paying for, yet I had never been permitted to feel at home there. For years, I had contributed $3,000 every single month toward the household expenses. It was not a request, it was a mandate from Brenda. She called it a family contribution, a way for me to show my gratitude for being included in their world. But as I stood in my sterile, corner bedroom, I saw it for what it truly was. I had been the silent investor in their version of a family, footing the bill for a lifestyle they felt entitled to, while I was treated like a line item on a ledger. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and the account was finally closed. Then there was the matter of the $60,000. A year ago, Brenda had approached me with a look of manufactured panic that I now recognized as a performance. She told me there was an emergency business tax audit, a sudden crisis that threatened the very foundation of global freight. She said only my personal savings, the money I had scraped together since I was 22, could bridge the gap until the next quarter. She did not call it a loan, she called it a sacrifice for our legacy. I later discovered the audit was a total fabrication. That money did not go to the government. It went into a high-end public relations firm for a boutique jewelry line Brittany was playing around with before she got bored and moved on. My mother had laundered my life savings through a fake crisis just to buy my sister a vanity project. Whenever I tried to bring up my career or my desire for a seat at the executive table, Brenda would pivot to my appearance with a precision that was almost surgical. She used a calculated form of psychological manipulation to keep me in the dark. "You are not like Brittany," she would say, her eyes scanning my face with a pity that felt like a sharp blade. "You do not have the aesthetic for the front office, Courtney. You should be grateful you have a place here at all." She needed me to believe that my lack of beauty made me unmarketable, so that I would never think to look for a door. She wanted me to believe that being used was the only way I could be loved. As I packed my bags, I saw my Aunt Heather standing in the doorway. She was the operations manager, the only person who actually saw the mechanics of the company, and the only one who truly understood the depth of the theft. She stood there in a heavy, suffocating silence she had worn like a uniform for a decade. I could see the battle in her eyes, the silent regret of the sentinel who had watched the fortress fall from the inside but lacked the courage to sound the alarm. She had been caught between a desperate hope that Brenda would eventually find her conscience and the cold reality of the damage being done to me. Heather had been a silent witness to a decade of emotional and financial extraction. Now, as I prepared to leave, her regret was a weight she could not share, and I would no longer carry for her. She did not stop me, she did not apologize. She simply looked at me, with a faintly kind light of kinship that arrived far too late to change the balance sheet. A year has passed, and the view from my new office on the 92nd floor makes the old 61st floor suite look like a basement. Everything about my life now is defined by precision and distance. On my desk, in a frame of brushed steel, sits my Federal Customs broker license. It is more than just a piece of paper. It is my armor. While Brenda was busy telling me I lacked the executive aesthetic, I was quietly mastering the laws and regulations that actually keep the world's goods moving. I crushed their gendered expectations with the silent weight of my own success. My smartphone buzzed against the polished mahogany. I did not even have to look at the screen to know it was Brenda. In the last 2 hours alone, she had placed 14 missed calls. I did not return a single one. To me, she was now nothing more than a stranger with a persistent habit. I had spent 35 long years under her spell, obeying her every command because I was desperate for a scrap of her approval. But the spell was broken the moment she showed me her true face on my birthday. I looked at the notifications as they piled up. By the time I woke up the next morning, the count would reach 80 calls, and not a single voicemail left, because Brenda did not know how to ask for help, she only knew how to demand it. I kept her on silent, letting the vibrations serve as a rhythmic reminder of how far I had come. I did not block her. I wanted the evidence. I wanted to see the digital architecture of her collapse. The news from the industry was predictable. Global freight was bleeding out. I realized then that Brenda's entire identity was based on the illusion of power in an empty wallet. Her position as a CEO was a designer suit with no person inside it. She had spent decades confusing the appearance of wealth with the reality of competence. Her power had been a hollow shell, a lifestyle she had rented using my labor as the currency. Once I took my talent and my algorithms and walked out that door, the vault was revealed to be empty. Brittany was in over her head. She had been named the Vice President of Public Relations. But in the brutal world of international logistics, nobody cares about your social media presence when a shipment of medical supplies is stuck in a port in Singapore. She was losing our key clients in a flash because she treated a global supply chain like a high-fashion runway. They were finding out the hard way that without the ghost in the machine is just a pile of expensive, useless scrap metal. The rain in Chicago does not just fall, it searches for every crack in your armor. I sat in a dimly lit diner on the edge of the city, watching the neon sign flicker against the wet pavement. Across from me sat Heather. She looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen her. Her hands were trembling as she clutched a thick manila envelope, her eyes darting toward the door as if she expected Brenda to burst in at any moment. The air smelled of burnt toast and damp wool, a stark contrast to the luxury of the offices we used to share. "I have something you need to see," Heather whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. She pushed the envelope across the table. I did not open it immediately. I just looked at her, my expression as flat as a frozen lake. I was not there for a reconciliation. I was there for an audit. Inside that envelope was the evidence that transformed our family drama into a criminal case. It turned out that Brittany was not just incompetent, she was a predator. She had been leaking our most secure, proprietary shipping routes to a rival logistics firm. In exchange, she was receiving massive kickbacks under the table designer jewelry, luxury travel, and direct wire transfers to an offshore account. She was selling the very maps I had spent a decade drawing. She was burning the house down for the sake of the warmth. But the real kill shot was Brenda. To hide the $60,000 she had stolen from my savings, and to cover the massive hole Brittany was leaving in the company's operating budget. Brenda had been systematically tampering with the accounting books. She was not just moving numbers, she was forging signatures and creating ghost vendors to funnel cash back into the company. She had crossed a line that no rebranding could ever fix. This was not a family squabble anymore. This was a moral and criminal disaster of the highest order. I looked at the forged signatures on the ledger. One of them was mine. My mother had used my name to authorize a fraudulent transaction 3 months after she had fired me. She had gambled on my silence, assuming I would never have the resources or the spine to look back. She thought I was still that little girl bringing home straight A's, desperate for a pat on the head. She had miscalculated. In her world, I was just a ghost, and ghosts are not supposed to be able to hit back. Heather told me the board was starting to ask questions. The major clients were noticing the data leaks. The walls were closing in, and Brenda was panicking. She was trying to blame the accounting discrepancies on me, claiming I had left the books in a mess before I vanished. It was a classic move, the villain proving they have no remorse to justify their own survival. I felt a cold surge of clarity. Anger is a volatile fuel, but precision is a weapon. I did not feel the urge to scream or cry. Instead, I saw the situation for what it was. A balance sheet that needed to be zeroed out. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. But now the debt was due in full. I looked at Heather and tucked the envelope into my bag. "You should not have waited this long," I said, my voice clinical and quiet. Heather looked down at her coffee, the silent regret of the sentinel finally breaking her. I did not offer her comfort. I had no more to give. I left $20 on the table and walked back out into the rain. I had the data. I had the proof. And tomorrow, the ghost was going to start talking. I happened to visit a client near the old Global Freight headquarters, and I could not help but notice the state of the building. The windows, once polished to a mirror shine, were conspicuously dirty, and the indoor plants I had once cared for were withered and brown in the lobby. On my way back to my car, I unexpectedly ran into Brenda, coming out of the entrance. I instinctively tightened my grip on my briefcase, expecting a berating, but to my surprise, she approached me in a sweet, cajoling tone. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice dripping with a fake warmth that made my skin crawl. "I have called you so many times. Did you change your phone?" It seemed she had not even considered the possibility that I had been ignoring her because I despised her. She did not wait for an answer. She gestured vaguely toward the building and said, "Look at the state of this place. It is dreadful, isn't it? You can start working from tomorrow. I am not even angry anymore. I forgive you for leaving a year ago. Just come back and take responsibility for the office." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold Chicago wind against my face. "Mom, I am already working at another company, and I am happy there," I responded as calmly as I could. Her face contorted into something monstrous in an instant. She bellowed right there in the middle of the street. "What? You are telling me you are working somewhere else while our company is in trouble? I do not give a damn about other companies. You are mine, understand?" I did not shrink back this time. I looked her directly in those cold, calculated eyes. "You fired me, remember?" I asked. "What about Brittany? What happened to the beautiful face of the company?" Brenda snorted and began to vent her frustrations right there on the sidewalk. She admitted that Brittany had been caught having affairs with 3 men from their key client's office. The dealings had ended in a flash. She had moved Brittany to clerical work, but Brittany could not even clean properly or manage the simplest accounting. "Ever since you left, the office has been in shambles," Brenda hissed, her grin turning into something desperate. "I need you to take responsibility. It was the same old trick, blaming others and letting someone else clean up their mess. But I was done being her janitor." "It was you who fired me, Brenda," I said, my voice rising just enough to catch the attention of the people walking by. "And the reason you fired me was because I am ugly, right?" Brenda started to stutter as a crowd began to gather, intrigued by the scene. She tried to tell me I was misunderstanding, that we should go inside, but I did not stop. "I have been working my butt off for 10 years, I told her. And the crowd began to stir with murmurs of disbelief. "But you decided to hand the company to my sister who barely does any work just because she fits your aesthetic. Is that your brilliant business judgment?" The glares from the bystanders were turning into a collective wall of judgment. Brenda started to panic, sweating and turning pale. Then, something finally snapped inside her. She lost all control and started shouting at the top of her lungs, "Shut up! It is all your fault for being ugly and gloomy. Ugly people should know their place and obediently do what beautiful people say. That is all you are good for." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of several people holding up their smartphones. This was the viral moment within the viral story, the precise second where the villain digs their own grave in front of a global audience. People were already uploading the video with headlines about the beautiful woman's toxic reality. Brenda stood there, breathing hard, realizing too late that she had not just insulted me, she had just broadcasted her own moral bankruptcy to every client and partner she had left. The viral video was the final domino. Within 48 hours, every major client had terminated their contracts with Global Freight, refusing to be associated with a brand built on such public, toxic bigotry. The investigations into the forged signatures and the missing $60,000 followed quickly, stripping away what was left of Brenda's hollow empire. The bankruptcy was total. Brenda and Brittany were forced to move into a cramped, 45-year-old apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place with thin walls and no view of the skyline they once thought they owned. Brittany now bounces between part-time retail jobs, struggling because she was never taught how to work, only how to pose. Brenda is often recognized from the internet, a shadow of the woman who once ruled a 61st-floor suite, now silently working a night shift where nobody cares about her executive aesthetic. But my peace did not come from watching them fall. It came from realizing that justice is not just about the punishment of the past. It is about the architecture of the future. I decided to practice the justice of the sower. I took the money I recovered from the lawsuit and founded the Heather and Courtney Scholarship Fund. It is dedicated to underprivileged students who have the grit and the talent for logistics, but lack the correct look or the social connections to get through the door. By building something new, I made my mother's cruelty feel small, irrelevant, and ultimately, powerless. I found a partner at my new firm, a man who is not a socialite or a model, but who looks at my data models with a genuine, deep respect. He told me he fell for me because I am diligent, sincere, and because I carry a strength that does not need to be shouted. We are planning a small, quiet wedding soon, one that will not be featured in a PR magazine, and that is exactly how I want it. I stood on my balcony last night, looking out at the Chicago skyline as the first light of dawn turned the lake into a sheet of hammered silver. The wind carried the faint, enchanting melody of birdsong from a nearby park, but this time, the sound did not feel like a countdown to a dismissal. It felt like a greeting. I am no longer the ghost in the machine. I am the architect of my own life, and for the first time in 35 years, I can breathe. If you believe that character outweighs a fake smile, and that hard work will always find its way to the light, share this story. Subscribe to join the community of architects who finally refuse to stay in the dark. Thank you for listening to my journey.